going to be talking really about how work is evolving and how our jobs are taking over and becoming this dominating force. And largely sort of from the perspective of a participant in what feels to be an increasingly unbearable workload. But I guess any sort of discussion about work normally starts with the idea, or increasingly in the last year, it's become a discussion of robots taking over. I've seen so much debate about the way that work's going to evolve and the way that we're going to sort of head into the world of automation. And I saw this, I thought I'd share this to open us up. This tweet says, "The feeling when you realize the robots will steal your job." The robots are going to steal our jobs. Okay, so a lot of the thing I'm going to show here is about 6 months ago, I started, here's a little life lesson. I started having a curiosity in the world of work, and I was really interested in chatting to people about work culture and how work evolved. And here's what you find, is if you contact someone saying, "Can I have a chat to you about work culture?" they generally say no. If you say to them, "Can I have a chat to you about work culture for a podcast?" you'll be very surprised how many say yes. So I've spent the last six months doing a podcast about work culture, really just to follow my own fascinations. I'm barely in it. That's a plus point. But so trying to understand these things. And I think, you know, the critical thing that's become clear to me through looking at that is that there's been a really significant change in our relationship with work in the last 5 years. And that's directly down to one thing. That's directly down to the fact that since we all got email on our phone, and any of us who are old enough will know that most of us begged to get email on our phone. We saw the one guy over, the manager, and then the group head got it, and then someone else got it, and then we begged if we could get email on our phone. But ever since we've got email on our phone, we're all doing 2 hours a day more work. And what that means is that, firstly, it's taken the average working day from 8 hours a day to 10 hours a day. But in addition, the volume of email has multiplied. Email breeds. The more you reply to it, it's like gremlins. It's the more you respond to it, the more it comes back. And so consequently, our volume of work has gone up. And that's really significant when it comes to understanding the world of work, because half of all of us, so half of all the people in this room, if you answer email out of work hours, will demonstrate signs of stress. So email is leading. That additional work is actually creating an environment of stress. Obviously, it means that work's evolving and becoming a lot harder. The next thing is that this is a piece of work, and Gallup in the US do a lot of work really trying to understand. If you search for the Gallup Workforce Survey, the volume of work that they do trying to understand our relationship with work is really deep and really sophisticated. And they say 78% of people report that they go to work to shut off. They don't bring their real selves to work. They adapt to who they are in the work environment. So consequently, we've got this increasing volume of work. We've got people feeling like they're not their real selves in a work environment. And I guess the final part to add to the catalogue of problems is just the pressures that all of us are under now, societal pressures. So the average home in London is 12 times salary. London has the longest commute in Europe. So I know that not everyone's here is from London, but London's commute is 74 minutes, is the highest commute in Europe. It's not the highest in the world. Places like Mexico City have a worse commute, but it's significantly higher than pretty much any other European major city. And of course, add to that university debts. Back to the commute one, a long commute directly correlates in women to higher levels of unhappiness. So, and I suspect that's partly down to domestic responsibilities still unfairly fall on women, but long commutes, particularly for women, when you have that debate, shall we move out, think about your happiness levels, because they're the things that pay the price. So what I'm going to do is talk through why an understanding of work culture and an understanding of being happy at work is rooted in the brain. And the more that we can understand the science of our brain, the more we can understand how to make work better. So I'll give you a couple of things. Now, what you tend to find is that scientists and psychologists have found a number of systems that drive our motivations, that drive our behaviors in the brain. But two really important systems are the fear system and the seeking system. So the fear system you'll be aware of, it's our fight or flight. It's our attempt to preserve ourselves when we're presented with difficulties. But the seeking system is the innate desire in all of us to wander, to discover, to explore new things. And the higher up the food chain you are, the more advanced your seeking system is. So one illustration is great white sharks can't be kept in captivity. You can't keep a great white shark in captivity because there's nothing that can feed its seeking system sufficiently to keep it alive. So it quickly reverts to a state of depression and dies. So the fear system and the seeking system are related to each other, but they're really important in terms of understanding our motivations, our desires at work. Effectively, if we're going to be happy at work, we have to try and feed our seeking system. You could call it curiosity, you could call it a desire to learn new things, but we need to feed that system. And just to go into a bit more depth on this, the critical thing about these two systems is they are interrelated. The seeking system, all the work on this was done by a guy called Jack Pansep at Washington State University. And what he found was that the seeking system, while it's the most important for driving our motivation, that sense of curiosity of constant learning, it's most important. It's an incredibly fragile system. So one illustration is he looked at rats. And he put rats in a cage, and rats are immensely playful. In fact, when they measured rats, they found that at 2 rats in a cage, they could calculate around 50 incidents of rats playing with each other within 5-6 minutes. They play all the time. They've got a great sense of fun. But the moment you put cat hair, a tiny bit of cat hair in a rat cage, they stop playing, and the fear system wipes it all out. So it's a really interesting demonstration that the seeking system, that sense of, you might call it curiosity, creativity is probably the way that work would frame it, is completely damaged by fear. And that's very relevant when it comes to architecting how our work environments work. If your work culture is constructed around fear, around trying to hold people to targets, to pressures, then directly that has an impact on creativity. So the question I wanted to understand was this. I work at an organisation that had a tough time last year, and I wanted to understand, can work make us happier? So, can our work actually be the cause of us going home at the end of the day? And the answer is yes, but indirectly. You can't aim to make people happy. So there are a few red herrings along the way. When work tries to make us happy, they often create things that seem to be very expressly with the intention, let's make everyone 4% happier today. First one is the smoothie delusion. So the first one is the idea that by giving everyone smoothies, hey, great news, guys, there's muffins and smoothies in the kitchen, go and help yourself. It doesn't correlate to any increase in long-term happiness whatsoever. That's interesting, right? Because work giving us perks and benefits superficially might seem like it's enhancing our work. But that sort of hedonistic pleasure, in as much as you could call smoothie hedonistic, but that hedonistic pleasure doesn't actually correlate to long-term happiness. The next one is just the myths about what good work and successful work are. I'm particularly annoyed and frustrated with this one. So this is a quotation by Marissa Mayer, who was one of the early employees of Google and was till recently the CEO of Yahoo. And Marissa Mayer said, the secret of success at work is working 130 hours a week. And I thought I'd do the maths on that one for you. That's working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. So, in fact, if anything, it directly is borne out to be the opposite of the truth. So there's a significant work by a guy called Daniel Levitin. And Daniel Levitin is someone who's really studied the brain. And in fact, what he's found is that the human capacity for work is around 50 hours a week. that's really interesting because that sort of, if you look back at that 10 hours a day that most of us are doing, we're all working at our maximum capacity. In fact, if you look at the American Labour Force Survey, the American Labour Force Survey says that the average American worker does 3 hours of work a day. So within that 10 hours, we're actually producing far less than we think. And I think an understanding of how we can improve work understands that relationship, that presenteeism, being active at a desk for 10 hours, doesn't necessarily correlate to 10 hours of work. And the final red herring is, sometimes this is called geek exploitation, the blurring of the lines between work and social life, allowing people to skateboard around the office, having pool tables, allowing people to play beer pong after work. These things are deliberately intended to blur the lines, and in fact, one of the most progressive cultures I think I've seen is Slack. I'm often skeptical of Silicon Valley cultures, but Slack says that they expect people to work probably between 10 and 6, and then not do any work after that. So they don't have any ping pong tables, they don't have any attempts to bring people there. And in fact, they say as a result of that, if you look at the CVs of people who work at Slack, they tend all to have really well-developed hobbies and side projects. It's actually demonstrably a better way to re-energize yourself for those 50 hours of work if you take a break from it. So I thought I'd look at some solutions. How can we make work better? And I thought I'd kick off by looking really at some of the big themes for happiness. The number one way to make yourself happier in life is to get happier friends. Now, I know that that's not related to work, but it's an interesting thing, right? As you're debating what to do with your weekend this weekend, as you're mulling over how to spend your free time, spending more time with happy friends is a really important way to be happier. The second way, and again, this doesn't impact on work, but I guess it impacts on our whole lives. The second way to be happier in life is to sleep more. If you get around 8 hours sleep a night, those people correlate to being happier. So 2 ways to make yourself happier. But what can work do? And I thought I'd go on and look firstly at the context of work. So sometimes these things are called cultures, sometimes these things are called values. I think for the sake of this discussion here, I just wanted to call them the tone of a company. Because the tone of a company is, how does the company respond when someone is off sick? How does the company respond when someone wants to work from home on a project? How does the company respond to maternity, to big things that happen? The tone of the company often sets that culture, but it's the tone that you can control. And so what you hear, an American venture capitalist, a guy called Ben Horowitz. And Ben Horowitz gave a presentation on culture about 3 months ago. You can find it online. And his definition of culture, he said, companies need to create shocking rules. And this was an example of one of his shocking rules: move fast and break things. This was, I presume people are familiar with this. This is one of the defining early rules of Facebook. And it was meant to be sort of deliberately discordant and jarring, but show why they were different. What I particularly love about this rule is that they changed it. They changed it to move fast with stable infrastructure, which for me, it's a bit like you get a text from a mate saying, fancy going absolutely mental tonight, and then you turn up a meeting and he says, I'm only having 2. Let's go crazy, but also we've got work tomorrow. So they adapted their rules to fit in to that. And I guess probably the biggest illustration of the tone of a company could be borne out by a couple of these companies here. So Uber and Netflix are very similar to each other and actually Amazon is close as well, in that they all have one of their defining values as conflict leads to better outcomes. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Conflict leads to better outcomes. And so Amazon believes that through conflict, you actually get a better interrogation of problems. And rather than that, and sort of human compunction to try and get along with each other, if you disagree, then actually better ideas come from it. Uber's was rather more brash, and so rather more filled with machismo. So Uber believed that by giving people with autonomy, allowing people to go out and set the rules themselves, they would achieve better outcomes. And those things clearly had a pretty big consequence to what's happened in the last 3 to 6 months. Netflix is another example. Netflix is an interesting company that's been fully transparent with its tone, its culture. They publish a 130-slide document on their culture. And I think the thing you'd say when you read it is, this is not for everyone. So back to the tone of the company, Netflix say, if you achieve an A for effort, if you, back to your old school reports, if you get a 1 for effort, top marks for effort, but a B for performance, we're going to pay you to leave the company. That's a tone. That's an interesting tone. They additionally say, Netflix is sort of regarded as one of the inventors of the no vacation policy. But I chatted to Patty McCord, the woman who came up with the document, and she was really explicit. No vacation policy means no vacation policy. They don't really want you to take holiday. Right, that's a tone. That sets a tone for how a company operates. And so thinking of what the tone is, whether it's laid down in a 130-slide document or whether it exists in the interactions between people, is really important. But I'm going to give you 4 things that any company can change. So the number one goes back to some of the things I said before. The number one way to make your work environment and your culture more successful is to think of all the participants in it, and that's to manage people's batteries. So if you think of the expectation of people now answering emails immediately, the notion of being on 24/7, in fact, what you tend to find is that doesn't correlate to a creative mindset. In fact, Daniel Levitin believes that we have a finite capacity in a day to make decisions. So he believes if you spend the morning watching YouTube clips and answering emails, by the time you come to answer something significant at 8 o'clock or 9 p.m., you don't have the capacity to answer it. He believes it's that finite. Our attention is that finite. So consequently, you need to think about how you manage that battery. And for me, thinking back to that US Labour survey is the critical start point there. Because if you say to yourself, I'm going to do 3 hours of productive work today, then you start thinking, how do I ready myself? How do I energize myself to deliver that? And so that's why organizations like in the US, the Energy Project, it's run by a guy called Tony Schwartz. And Tony Schwartz has been successful in multiple fields, but one of the biggest initiatives of the Energy Project is take back your lunch. The idea that taking a deliberate pause in the middle of a working day can be an incredibly powerful thing. And it feels counterintuitive, right? If you're sitting at a computer and you've got 40 emails to answer, the notion of walking away from those 40 emails feels like it's actually reducing your productivity. All of the evidence suggests that you come back with a sense of renewal, you answer those emails with more energy. And I think the way I'd ask you to do this, if like me, you're one of those idiots who sits at home answering emails at home, and maybe you sit there with your laptop on your lap, or you sit there at a kitchen table answering emails, I ask you to check in with yourself, to look at what you've actually done. Because if you're anything like me, I'm looking around the kitchen, I've got music on, I'm not really doing anything. And that's what effectively you're doing is you're running down your battery when you're already on empty. You're giving yourself the illusion of working when you're not really working. So managing your battery and trying to ensure that you're in a very good... Get ready for that 3 hours of good work is really critical. It's something that, in fact, most authors demonstrate. Most authors, whether it's Charles Dickens, Charles Darwin, a lot of them exhibit and have reached a similar pattern of behavior. And that is they get up in the morning and they write for 3 hours. J.K. Rowling does the same. Charles Dickens is a total inspiration because Charles Dickens wrote 12 novels. He wrote about 200 short stories. He edited a weekly magazine, and he never worked in the afternoon. What a legend. Fuck Marissa Meyer. We should be celebrating him. That is like understanding that managing your energy is a really important part of being your creative best. The next one is finding flow. And this comes, there's a guy called Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and he did a lot of work trying to understand when people felt satisfied by work. And people report being satisfied by work if they've found themselves in a state of flow. Flow is when you're in that abandon, you're lost in the work sort of feels consuming, and you might achieve a state of flow, maybe when you're writing a presentation, when you're writing a document for someone, you're preparing something for someone, and you ignore those distractions that punctuate our whole life. If you've ever found yourself saying things like this, I can't seem to get anything done at work. My most productive time is before everyone comes in. Have you ever found yourself saying those things? Oh, I stay late because I get stuff done. That's because you're trying to achieve a state of flow. And the biggest challenge to flow is that open plan offices are a total disaster for productivity. So open plan offices where we're subjected to constant interruptions are the very worst thing for productivity. Now I know I'm not necessarily advocating working from home because I think there's an esprit de corps that you achieve by people working together. And I know working from home has got quite a bad reputation this year. I thought I'd remind ourselves of this.
No, I would argue that this is a triumph of democracy. Scandals happen all the time. The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children has just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me. Pardon me. My apologies.
What's this going to mean for the region?
My apologies. South Korea's policy choices on North Korea have been severely limited in the last 6 months to a year because of North Korea's behavior. Most recently, the use of VX gas in the airport in Malaysia that indicates that North Korea really doesn't follow global norms.
A few months after it, but the construction of that is the most beautiful comedy. It comes in 3 acts. Here we go. Walk into a club like, leaving the office like. If you look closely, you can actually pinpoint the exact moment he realizes he's going to become a meme. So I know working from home has got a bad reputation, and I think probably what we're gradually evolving to is a bit like the optimist who designed intercity trains, that there'll be a quiet carriage and a noisy carriage. But I think, if we're trying to imagine what the future of work looks like, then open plan offices are certainly here to stay, but allowing people to go into a place where they can work silently is a really critical component. And I guess the reason why I'm saying that is because actually, in the absence of that decision, what we've allowed right now is something that really damages the third thing that we need to change in work. What we've permitted, and I suspect everyone here recognizes this, what we've permitted is the rise of the headphones. Now, headphones are an immensely effective way to achieve flow yourself. And it's a great way to try and isolate yourself from the noise of an open plan office. But if you look into the way that ideas are created, headphones are probably one of the worst things to happen to the working environment in the last 10 years. And this is why, because there's a guy called Sandy Pentland, who works at the MIT. And what he's done is he's taken advantage of the amazing advances in technology that have happened in the last 10 years to, in his words, link big data with human psychology. So he did a series of experiments where he effectively put badges, lanyards, like the ones you're wearing around your neck, but he turned them into electronic devices. And what those devices did is they measured the patterns of interactions between everyone in a working environment. They measured whether you were talking to each other, whether someone was questioning the other person, whether one person was monologuing and the other person just listening. Measured all of those things. Went into meeting rooms, measured how people were interacting in meeting rooms. And what they found was really fascinating. So he overlaid data to the creativity that offices were finding. And what he found was chat was directly related to creativity. So an idea is created when I go over and I talk to someone and I test that idea on someone. I watch their reactions, I measure their responsiveness to me. Then I go over and I try it on someone else. And it's through that iteration, that sort of experimentation, that an idea evolves from a casual thought into something that's got legs. And he directly measured that chat is a direct correlate with creativity. That means that if you're creating a working environment where everyone's sitting with headphones, actually you're destroying the one thing that's, for most of us, our big USP. So back to the robots thing, I saw a piece of work which is stark, which said that anyone who's earning less than £20 an hour should expect to see their job automated in the next 10 years. And effectively what we're moving to is a stage where any job that's, weirdly they call it algorithmic, if it can be repeated very simply, then that sort of job is disappearing. The sort of jobs that are going to prevail are all of the other things, the creative jobs, heuristic jobs they're sometimes called, but the jobs where a creative input is required. So if the defining quality of new work is creativity, chat is the important part of that. Look, as a secret of success, it's not the worst thing in the world, right? But we need to think about how we bring it into our workplace. The final one is being our whole self. And this is, I guess it goes back to that Gallup survey that I showed at the start. 78% of people saying that they feel like they're an adapted version of themselves. They're a false version of themselves in a work environment. Being your whole self is a really critical part of achieving your creativity, of actually exploring that seeking system that I mentioned at the outset. Here's an interesting piece of work. So this was one thing that a researcher called Dan Cable introduced to try and see if you could achieve an impact. And I'm going to read this for you. It says, so at an induction process, he did 3 induction processes. And the first one was a standard induction process. The second one is they got a manager to talk to a team. And the third one, they did this. They took 10 minutes and asked people to write down what is unique about you that leads to your happiest times at work. Reflect on a specific time when you were acting in the way you were born to act. Right, in itself, that seems pretty trivial. But that had an extraordinary impact on people's link to work. So it led to, that was done in a call center. So call centers are an amazing place to test, because there's such a big volume of people, you can really test people's interactions. And what they found was job retention went up by 78%, productivity went up by about 25%, and people felt more connected to the environment they were in. So allowing people to bring them whole self to work. But this is a really trivial change, right? This is a 15-minute episode at the start of someone's induction. So imagine if an organization brought that to bear in the realities of a job. And that's what some organizations are trying to do. They're trying to encourage people to feel like they can be the unadapted version of themselves and permit that to be part of their working persona. So I think really the critical thing about that one is the volume of science on it. So I gave 4 things that any workforce can change. Number 1, managing battery. And I think thinking really about how we permit people to do their 3 hours of good work at a time that suits them. Maybe it's 4 hours in your place. Maybe you're the good guys. But allowing people to get the most from their times of high productivity. The second one is finding your flow, thinking about what are the quiet carriages in your work environment. What's the way that people can try and get on with something without interruption. Third one is the importance of understanding that creativity is powered by chat. And the final one is allowing people to bring their whole selves to work. It's sometimes called strength-based management, but allowing people to bring their whole selves to work. So, like I say, I consider myself really a student in trying to improve the world of work. I've spent 6 months doing the Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat podcast, and I'm trying to understand really from experts how we can make the environment that we work in less stressful. Thank you very much.